What's up, everybody? Jensen Cummings here. Thank you for tuning in. We're going to be talking restaurants, best served fresh, the fresh ideas, new approaches, best practices within the restaurant, hospitality, food, and beverage industry. And we have none other than Monte Silva on with us today, who's restaurant coach from #restaurateur. He's just out of Nashville. Monte, excited to be talking with you.
I'm great to be here. It's great to be here. I'm a big fan of the show.
Yes, I thank you for that. And I love the title that we threw out here for episode 150 of the live show since March 18th. Unbelievable. Dishwasher to director of ops is such a perfect, isn't that the trajectory? Like it really is.
Yeah, I saw your poll you did the other day. It seemed like Dishwasher was the king. And
yeah, we have a Facebook group called Best Served Together where, we're always sharing kind of our unsung hospitality heroes. We get an opportunity to acknowledge each other in the industry. And I was interested. I was like, where did everyone start out in the industry? And by far, I think there's 200 something replies. By far, in the restaurant side specifically, Dishwasher, number one. It's where I started. It's where you started. So we'll get into that a little bit. Before we get into where you started as a dishwasher, tell everybody exactly, #restaurateur, what can they expect from your company?
Okay, so it started off as a blog, #restaurateur on LinkedIn, and I started writing a weekly blog. It started about a year and a half ago, and people just really resonated. We talked about industry things and things that were pertinent to right now. So I talked a lot about different things, like what things we're going to talk about today, and I saw that there were people that were really interested in what was being said, but it didn't. It was more philosophy because LinkedIn limits your characters, and so then that kind of morphed into. I was working as a director of operations at the time, and then COVID hit, and laid a lot of us off. Unfortunately, when you're the director of operations, a lot of times, you're not considered the most critical component because you're not physically working shifts in a restaurant. So if you're going to cut, that's kind of where that middle management's kind of where they go. So I found myself feeling like I was missing the industry. I was missing being in a restaurant with people. I was missing working with teams. I was missing talking about the industry. So I started really ramping up. I started a Facebook page called #restaurateur. It's not the symbol, because in Facebook you can't use symbols, so it's spelled out #restaurateur.
Do people know how to spell the word hashtag? I don't even know if we know how to spell the word hashtag.
Yeah, I know. It's funny.
Restaurateur, I always put an N in there, and I remember it's not restaurant tour, it's restaurateur. So
that's true. Well, that's the French spelling, but I think it can be spelled both ways. But I went with the traditional spelling. But I started building a community of people that in the industry that took their career seriously and wanted to be able to talk about things. And this is a time during COVID that we really have an opportunity to reshape how we move forward, reshape what our industry looks like, and definitely. As we're talking, and as I've listened to your podcast, there's a lot of conversations about what does this look like on the other side. So started building a community, and then most recently just started a coaching business where I can work with restaurant owners and different people to really help them work through this industry, this COVID, and make sure that we come out on the other side. Not only that we survive, but we come out stronger.
I love it. All right, we're going to get into some of the granular stuff. As you mentioned when you started, you couldn't go deep. So we're going to deep dive into a couple topics that are near and dear to me. We're going to talk about people, the most important, the human capital in our industry. Before we get there, let's talk about when you first caught the hospitality bug. When and where was that? Take us all the way back. Dishwasher, clearly. Yeah. So when was that?
So I lived in Santa Rosa, California. I was 15 years old. I started off as a dishwasher in a hotel, and really learned kind of.
What was the hotel called?
It was Flamingo Hotel. Yeah, and it was they had a restaurant in there, and I was washing dishes and kind of learned the hustle early. There were servers there that I would save the steak bones and the scraps, and would sell them to the servers to give to their dogs. So it was kind of an early hustle. And
I like it.
Yeah. You got to do what you got to do. And it's something I'm sure we'll talk about in this show, but that's not there's an unfair pay disadvantage for kitchen people still to this day, and that was that was 40 years ago. So and it still exists. So I really tried to work the hustle, and then I kind of moved into some prep positions and line cook and saute and grill and
nice. So you were hooked from the get-go. It wasn't like this was a summer job and then you found your way back into the industry later. It was clear to you had found your people.
Yeah. In high school, that's what I did, and it was a good job. You could work part-time and still, I was living at home. My dad started charging me rent my senior year in high school. So,
Whoa. All right. Tough love. I'm into it. So take us forward a few. You've had a storied career, worked, Wolfgang Puck and what are a couple of the stops along your career that you really took something away from? Give us 2-3 spots where it really formed who you are today.
Yeah. So my first, after doing a stint in the Caribbean, I went to work for Chevy's Mexican restaurant, which I had worked for as a server and bartender. But I started off, I moved to LA and got into management, and that was a phenomenal training ground for me because there, a lot of companies, if you go to work for a new company as a manager, you might spend a few weeks in the kitchen, you might spend a few weeks on the floor, and then you're either a back of the house guy or front of the house guy. Yeah. And Chevy's, because it wasn't as culinary driven as a lot of other chef driven restaurants, you as an assistant, you might spend 6 months as a bar manager, 6 months to a year as assistant KM, and then service manager. And you had to do those positions to become a head KM, and then you had to do that position to become a GM. So it was probably the best training ground for me. And it's things that I learned there about training your people that, I still continue to use today. So that was a great experience. Had my first mentor there. Tom Bryan was an awesome guy, and ended up following him to another company.
What's one thing Tom Bryan? If there was one thing that you say, I completely stole that from Tom. I say it all the time. It's a quote from him or something that I teach all managers. What's one Tom Bryan-ism that you have stuck with through the years?
I would say he was a Nazi when it came to light bulbs, and he would say, if you can't even keep the light bulbs, on, he said, your guest is going to say, well, if you can't even keep the light bulbs on, what's going on in the rest of the company? What's the rest of the business? So what's going on behind the closed doors that we can't see? So
gotcha. That was always the restrooms for me. I found myself always going to the restrooms, even if I didn't need to use the restroom, just to pee, because if they don't take care of the restrooms, who knows what's going on? So that one light bulb that's out in the corner that people have been ignoring for 2 weeks, that was Tom's big one. All right, I'm into that. Details. It makes sense. It's do your checks, do your line checks, sweep the floor, understand kind of where you're at, doing that status update. I think is super important. So, all right, take us forward a little bit more. What was another spot that you really
I followed him to another company and was with them for a couple of years. And then I had an opportunity to go be a GM for Wolfgang Puck. And that was probably the next really great opportunity for me. And
which of the concepts was that?
So I started off as the GM of the Wolfgang Puck Cafe. They had a slightly casual concept that was a little more casual than Spago and some of his other higher end restaurants. And it was in Santa Monica on Montana Avenue. And it was about 3 miles from the corporate office. So we had corporate people in there all the time. And I ended up becoming a GM over that location, and then also one in El Segundo. And so I was the GM of 2 locations. And that was just a great experience because with my kitchen background, I was working for a chef-driven company. And so, my chef and I were partners. It wasn't a lot of companies, the chef reports to the GM, but in this company, chef and GM were equal status. And so it was a great opportunity to work side by side with the chef as a partner. And
do you value that? Do you see a lot of strength in that, of having kind of that dual leadership versus having the buck stops here at one person with the general manager traditionally in a restaurant?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're less likely to make a bad decision if no decision is made unless the two of you agree to it. It could be troublesome if you don't have that perfect marriage. But so obviously, in an ideal situation where there's mutual respect between the chef and the GM, absolutely.
Yeah, I like that. And know your strengths and trust each other. I think that's an important thing. 2 locations, that kind of sent off my spidey senses a little bit. What do you have to do? We're going to talk even more about like your book and the people within that, the dynamic that you see in the restaurants being the most important. We are in full agreement there. 2 locations. How do you be present when you're split between multiple locations? I know a lot of managers deal with that and struggle with that.
Yeah, I didn't do that well. I as a GM, I had to spend full time in each restaurant. So I worked 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. in one restaurant, got on the 405 for an hour, drove to the other restaurant, and worked from 5 to midnight, 6 days a week. So it was definitely not. You grew up in the same. You're younger than I am, but you still grew up in that old school mentality of busting your butt working 70 plus hours. And I got to a point where I was working about 96 hours a week.
Yeah.
And it was brutal and nothing.
Yeah, the normal 75 hours a week and 29 out of 30 days was like normal for a lot of my career, which is why I burnt out and can't be in a kitchen anymore. It's not sustainable for sure. So have you found later on, I want to stick with that multiple location because it is a huge struggle and a challenge. And we've talked to several people, and I know this for myself. It's like the second location a lot of times is the hardest, right? Because all of a sudden you can take the nucleus that you built, the strength that you have a strong team concept, you've built community, and then you spread yourself thin and you don't have the bandwidth. You haven't actually trained systems, you've trained individuals, and then 3 of those people leave, and all of a sudden you're very vulnerable in that circumstance. What now? There's a lot of people that'll be watching this that are looking to go into a second location. Give us a couple of things that they might be looking out for.
Sure. So I didn't really learn this until later in my career when I became a director of operations, and I didn't necessarily have to spend a full shift, as a shift body running the shift. Right. So I got to the point where I realized that I can't micromanage. Even later in my career as a GM in Nashville, if there was a celebrity or a VIP that was going to be in the restaurant, I felt like I had to go in on my day off and make sure that they were taken care of. And so I really got to the point where I needed to be able to trust my people. And in order to do that, I had to hire really, really well, train really, really well, and then, share expectations and then kind of get out of the way and let them shine, let them do their thing and support them and kind of really focus more on mentality, because a lot of times if it's just a skill set thing, then what ends up happening is they don't understand why they need to do what they're doing. But if you create this mentality of why these things are important and they kind of take on that ownership mentality, then they really, really get it. And then you find yourself not having to be in the restaurant micromanaging.
Yes, I could not agree more. I think that mindset is everything. I think the food can be commoditized, the drinks can be commoditized, but the deploying the mindset of the human capital, I think, is so important. And too often in restaurants, I know you find this, we're in a scarcity mindset. We're struggling to survive. There's not enough time. We can barely get through the day. Somebody didn't show up. We're always looking at it through that skewed lens versus abundance mindset. Like, how do we drive revenue? How do we improve experience and opportunity within our teams and with our guests? And so mindset, let's go right there. I want to get right into that because mindset gets me fired up. The book, the ebook, #restaurateur, hospitality, right, is what you kind of just came up with. And I loved it. I sped read through as much as I could, and a couple chapters really jumped out at me. And this is what I really want to focus on for the meat of this conversation. You're talking about people, like it's all people. Building your team was one chapter I love. Hiring the best, and your people are your best asset. These really, really spoke to me. So I want to get into that. I wanted to start with mindset because I think it's all a mindset, and clearly that was something important to you. how do you teach mindset? Can you teach mindset?
That's a harder concept. I kind of define service as a skill set and hospitality as the mindset. And so,
yes.
I first and foremost, I feel like you have to build a culture of that in your organization, and you come up with whatever your mantra is, and make sure that it's focused on hospitality and the mindset of taking care of people, because that's, like you said, that's really the commodity that can't be replicated. You could rip off somebody's recipes, or I've seen a number of restaurant owners that maybe didn't grow up in the industry that are just taking recipes or downloading things on that they've read or seen on websites, and you can't do that with people. And so,
yep.
If hospitality is how the guest feels about the experience that they're receiving, the service they're receiving, then it's more of a mindset, and that's extremely difficult to train.
When you talk about culture, and I think we talk about that a lot, and it's this term that doesn't mean anything until you define it, right? It does not have a definition within your four walls until you define it and you stick with it and you're consistent with it, and there's clarity, communication, consistency within that. And I think that's very important. So let's get a little bit tactical, because I think it's easy to say, we're going to build this great culture, but what the hell does that mean? How do you do that on a day-to-day when you're barely getting through? And again, somebody didn't show up, and people no call, no show, and a reservation didn't show up, and this went wrong and that went wrong. The light bulbs are out, and oh my God, what are we going to do? Give us a couple things that you are making sure that you're anchored, or the North Star. How are you making sure that is actually happening in the day-to-day within the restaurant?
Sure. So I actually am stealing this. I listened to a great podcast, EntreLeadership. It's a Dave Ramsey podcast, and they compare culture and the larger word agriculture, right? And so they compare it to a farm or a garden where your environment is your soil, and you've got to make sure that you create an environment which is your culture. And so preparing that is super. Tilling the soil and refining who you are and what you're about is super, super important. Then they talk about your team players are really like a seed that you're planting in this soil, in this culture. And it's dependent upon what you do with that team player or that seed that really makes a difference. And they talk about training, and that's like watering the seed. You've got to invest in your people. And if you don't do that, then you're going to find yourself repeating conversations and disciplinary action because you didn't take the time to properly train and grow that seed or that teammate. So that's super big. And then validation, it's so important to go back to someone and say, man, you're doing a great job. And when I've started with new restaurant groups, it's amazing to me that when I say, hey, can I talk to you for a minute? They automatically think it's going to be bad.
Let's go deeper into that, because when you're talking about that, I was like, catch people doing something right. It's so easy. It's the intensity that we come at a problem versus what we come at somebody doing something well, right? And I always found myself trying and failing most often, but trying to have the same tenor and intensity when you did something wrong and when you did something right, which is a big, big struggle. Again, how do you teach that? I want to get, is there something, we're talking high level mindset, and I'm kind of all over the place. I apologize. I want to focus this. I want somebody who has the mindset and gets it, just doesn't know how to apply it, because is it pre-shifts? Is it training documents and having proper SOPs? What is some of the framework that we can create to support that actually happens? What's some of the tactical things that you're doing to apply that? Because I think the mindset, often people have the mindset, they just don't know what to do. And then they are always feeling like they can barely keep up. And that's when they start to snap, because they're feeling stretched thin. That feeling really well. What's a couple of things that you're doing practically to actually be able to hold yourself accountable to accomplishing that goal?
So first thing is it's about leadership over management. For me, management is about managing systems, and leadership is about leading people. And just like being, sideline in a football game or hockey game or whatever sport you want to throw in there, the coach is consistently having conversations. He's not watching the show and then afterwards picking it apart. He'll do that later and they'll analyze what they can do better. But on the field, game time, he's coaching and he's pulling people aside. So one example of that is I had the opportunity when I was an assistant general manager at one point in my career that because of I was a front of the house guy, but because of my back of house experience, I came into a restaurant that not only needed some leadership and guidance in the front of the house, but they didn't have a chef at the time. And so I kind of had to live that role as well. And so I would taste things in the kitchen and line checks or whatever, and I would taste things. And if something was not right, we would correct it on the spot. As a chef,
it's a teachable moment.
You're tasting, making sure that before that dish goes out, it's perfect. And then when it is perfect, you tell them, you go, hey, who made this sauce? And I did. And you say, dude, come here and taste this. And they taste it. And I said, you should feel proud about that. You should be excited. This was on point. This is the way it needs to be every time. Great job. And so that ongoing coaching leadership thing is super important. I think you have to always evaluate your players. And when people are accelerating and doing a great job, that you tell them that. And when they're not, you use it as a coaching moment and teaching tool. And that's super, super important.
Yeah. Always evaluate your players. Like that should be a t-shirt, 100%. Yeah. I think that's an important thing. So ongoing communication and lines of communication at all times, I think is critical. Right when I heard you speaking, I thought of something that I did when I actually went from kitchen to general manager to try and kind of evolve what was happening in the front of house so that it met what was happening in the back of house. And one of the things that I remember was watching the interaction front of house managers to line level it so often was like only interacting when something was going wrong. And so I implemented this thing. And I want to get your feedback on it. Is this the kind of system that you would put out there? Is every single server and bartender would have to tell me 3 things about every single table that they had. Whatever it was, they're into the Riesling, they're from Nashville, and it's their first time in. Great. Because then they always were giving you communication versus only when the shit hit the fan and then it's on fire and everybody's freaking out versus ongoing communication. So is that the kind of thing that you think is a way to instill a system around the mindset and the communication?
Yeah, it honestly, that helps your team actually give a crap. If they're just showing up and going through the motions, then they're performing the steps of service, but there's no love of the craft, love of the guest. When you can actually recite back things about, Danny Meyer talks about going fishing, where you're asking questions to your table, and it's super, super important. I tried to do that prior, if I take reservations on Open Table or whatever, Resi, whatever system you're using, if you can look through there and see who these people are and what they're about, and try to coordinate the experience to match the expectation. If a guest is coming in and, my wife and I, we adopted a little boy and he's now 1.5 years, but when we first got him, there were no day nights, right? You're with your kid 24/7. And so the first night we went out, that's super, super important. And so when you as a restaurateur can find those opportunities to create a great experience, you put that couple that's, enjoying the first night out since their baby was born in a corner booth, that's out of the way. It's more romantic. It's quieter. You pick a server that isn't going to talk their ear off. It's going to allow them some space. And, it's those kinds of things that really create those special moments for people.
Yeah, it's that thoughtfulness. All right, let's talk about hiring. Huge issue. We have a couple complexities here. Pre-COVID and COVID, a lot of different things, and then what happens coming out of this. Just to set the table for people. Pre-COVID, the average turnover in a restaurant is 73%. It's massive. And we're doing a lot of work to try and invert that, and how we get your employee retention and satisfaction to 73, 75%. The average restaurant tenure, this number just blows my mind every time, was 56 days. 56 days. We're churning through people. And look, there's lots of finger pointing. Well, kids these days don't hustle as much as we did when we came up in the industry. Well, they also don't think getting a plate thrown at your head is a badge of honor. So like, we have to define, basically, our goal is to have the best culture possible. If that means that we're investing in people, that's the way to do it. And if sometimes there's some bad eggs, there's going to be some bad eggs. But I'm a big believer on, like, you have to go from the leadership standpoint. So it's tough. COVID is creating a whole nother layer of complexity with how we're hiring, who we're hiring, how we're paying them, all of these different dynamics. Let's give people a couple things just to find the right people, let alone how you're going to manage those people in this moment. But finding the right people, what are some of the questions? What are the ways that you interact? What are some of the things that people need to be looking out for when they're trying to build their team?
Sure. So the first thing, obviously, is being someone that you want, that people want to work for, or work with. How
do you define that? How do you find that person? That's such a, like, is it just pure feeling? Do you need to have somebody who's on the hiring side that is more empathetic, is more like reading people, asking human questions versus practical? Can you do the skill set part of the job, service, or can you do the hospitality part of the job, mindset?
Absolutely. I would always hire mindset over skill set. We can train skill set, but hiring the right person, because the reality is, you can say you're a hospitable person, right? But if you're just doing it for the tip, then you're not a hospitable person. If you're blowing off your side work and making your team pick up the slack, then you're not a hospitable person, because if you cared enough about people, you would do your own side work and not put that on other people. I had after Tom Bryan, Wolfgang was a mentor and taught me a lot. And then the third one was John DiNapoli. And John, when he interviewed me, I moved to Nashville, and he interviewed me for a management position with Fleming Steakhouse, and he was the joint venture partner. And we met, and I did a working interview on the floor at the restaurant during a shift. And then the two of us went next door to the Marriott, and we sat down over a scotch, and he spent 2 hours with me and never asked me a question about the business or my resume. He wanted to know who I was. He wanted to know where I grew up. Tell me about your family. Tell me about things you like to do when you're not in a restaurant. And I think that you really, if you take the time to do that, you really glean who that person really is. And you really begin to understand the mindset and mentality and work ethic, and just if they're a good freaking person,
if they're a good freaking person. The end, like, that is, it's such an important thing. It's so overlooked, because again, we're in scarcity mindset. Like, we need this person to work. Can you work tomorrow? Can you start tomorrow? Because we're in the weeds and we're understaffed and all that, and so we're not asking the right questions because we don't want to, because we just need a body. Like, even you said body earlier, and I want to give credit to Chef Alan Plemons, who just a few days ago was like, the term bodies makes you think of like dead bodies, like just corpses that are just dead men walking, zombies. And I was like, wow, you're right. Like, so often we just are looking for a body, not a good freaking person. So I really, really appreciate that. Yeah, Josh, on target. I could not agree more. A good freaking person. The end. That's it. Just find good freaking people. Yeah. So I love it. I'm a big fan. I know we're going to wrap up here in a minute. I know we want to make an offer out there as your book is just coming out. I'm excited about that. Before we do that, though, parting thoughts. Any last thoughts you want to leave us with? We got a lot of quotable nuggets from you, Monte, and I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks. It's about people, and you and I talked about this before we went on camera. There's definitely a disconnect in proper compensation back of the house versus front of the house. And that's something that I talk about a lot. I think that we, as an industry, need to get better at, and that's not to take money away from the front of the house. They work hard as well, and I certainly don't knock that. But we need to figure out a way to properly compensate the back of the house, because the reality is we're losing traction on getting great people. There's not as many people that are passionate now about cooking, and it's a critical part of the industry. As we talked about before, dishwashers, critical part of the industry, and if we're not taking care of those people, then I think our industry is really, really going to suffer. Likewise, I think that we need to properly pay managers. When a bartender works 35 hours a week and makes more money than a manager that works 50, 60 hours a week, that's just not right. So
yeah, what incentive is there for a bartender or a server to become a manager? Because they're passionate. We sometimes feed on the people's passion for the industry, not giving them a balanced lifestyle. I could not agree more. And honestly, I think what you're talking about is one of the most important things. Is our ability to create balance is going to create longevity. That's how we create an equitable, profitable, and sustainable model in perpetuity, right? And I think it's such an important thing. So I could not agree more. All right, the book. I was really excited to read it. I was grateful that you sent it over, and I got more to read. Like I said, I was speed reading. I was like, I got to find 3 things that I really want to talk to you about. And of course, your chapters were so perfectly named. We're literally using some of the same language, which I love. And I know you wanted to offer up the book, so I'm excited about that. Let people know kind of what they can expect from the book a little bit more, and then kind of what you're offering today.
Sure. I wanted to say that I had an opportunity driving back from Tampa. I was down there for business, and had an opportunity to kind of podcast binge. And that Ming Tsai, if you guys haven't listened to that Ming Tsai episode,
He was on fire.
He talks a lot about the same kind of stuff that we're talking about today. So if you haven't seen it, go back, check out the other 149 episodes of Best Served, but especially the Ming Tsai one I got a lot out of. So I had an opportunity to dive in a little bit deeper from my typical LinkedIn blogs, that I could go deeper into not only the mentality and mindset of hospitality, but also going deeper into how to actually do these things. And so I wrote an ebook. It's going to go up for sale in a couple weeks, and I'm super excited about it. It's something that I think every restaurateur and chef will get something out of. And so I wanted to be able to offer it to the listeners for free if they wanted to download it. So if you go to #restaurateur@gmail, so it's spelled out, #restaurateur, no N, at Gmail, you can request a copy of it, and I will shoot it over to you.
Awesome. All right. That's all across the ticker, #restaurateur@gmail.com. Monte Silva. Check out the book. It deep dives into some stuff. So it's good. Like you start every chapter with mindset. So I really love that. It got me hooked. And then you got practical and granular. Like here's a couple tactics that you can deploy, which I think is important. Start with mindset and then move into strategy and then tactics. I'm a big buyer in just the way that you organized it. So I really appreciate that. Monte Silva, thank you so much. #restaurateur, check it out. And like Monte said, he's an expert. So he says, go check out the Ming Tsai episode. I would trust the guy. Really appreciate you being on. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Justin. It was awesome to talk to you. And I look forward to listening to more of your podcasts.
All right, Monte, have a great day. Cheers.
Thank you.
All right. As you heard, the ebook, #restaurateur, check it out. We'll post a couple other things about it. And so you can see that the book is free for the next couple weeks for anybody in the industry, anybody listening to this. #restaurateur@gmail.com. That's it. Mindset over skill set. I love it. Leadership over management. Love it. Best Served Fresh, as always. We're excited for these new channels. Best Served Fresh is all about fresh ideas, new approaches, best practices. We really want to think about how we evolve this industry, create that equitable, profitable, sustainable model, because we have an opportunity now more than ever. It's coming through a lot of struggle, but we truly have an opportunity. So from dishwasher to director of ops with Monte Silva of #restaurateur, 150 live episodes since March 18th. We've been hustling for you. We appreciate it. I hope we bring some value to you. Cheers.